true to form, we're going to start at 7:35. Welcome, everybody. My name is Steve Rohde. I am the proud chair of this wonderful group, Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. I remember the day we chose that name on a blackboard. Each word meant something, and it's continued to mean something for almost 23 years. I'm really grateful to have each one of you with us today. We have a very intriguing presentation, which we'll get to in a moment. So what we do is we introduce ourselves. It reminds us who we are. It lets our speaker know who they're speaking with. And it's a good opportunity to clear your throat early in the morning. But I want to dedicate this meeting to Phil Way. Happy birthday, Phil Way.
Yay.
Hey,
Thank you.
hey, Phil.
Today is Phil's birthday. He now qualifies for Social Security at 65. So it's great to have you, Phil. If you're proud of the number, what birthday is this?
Well, I started getting my Social Security 20 years ago.
It's a nice round number, 85 today?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, great. It's good to see you. It's good to have you on the board of directors and all of your continuing activism. So we'll actually start with yourself and tell us about your activities.
I'm Phil Way. I've been involved with ICUJP since 2001, and I am currently on the board. I'm a member of the Orange Grove Friends meeting in Pasadena.
Terrific. I'm going to go across my screen. Carol Francis.
Hi, Carol Francis Likens, ICUJP board writer, currently doing a solo show called Stolen Stories, written, directed, and performed by me, about growing up in the McCarthy era and the dangers of being pushed into a new one.
Lucy Bailey.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. I came to ICUJP more than 10 years ago with Stephen Fisk and Leland Stewart, who taught me about interfaith and how to acknowledge other people's religions and how to share mine. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
That's lovely, Lucy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Rick Banales, bienvenidos.
Hello, I'm Rick Vinales. I'm the communications and social media person for the group, and very glad to see you all this morning.
Terrific. Bob Zaugh, brief introduction right now.
Bob Zaugh, draft resistor, Peace Press, ran Peace Press for a while. I've been working with Gary Tyler for 35 years.
And we're going to hear a lot more from Bob. He is our speaker today. Anthony Manousis.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anthony Manousis. I'm a member of the Orange Grove Friends meeting and the First United Methodist Church here in Pasadena. I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit called Making Housing and Community Happen, and I serve on the board of ICUJP.
Welcome.
I'd like to add that besides what I said before, I have been in Pasadena for 10 years, and for those 10 years, I've been part of the Interfaith Study Group, which I really love. They really, like this group, have, this time, every month they have a topic that's very, very wonderful. And we, for those of you who know, we alternate places. We go to the temple, to a church, and to a mosque, depending on, each month a different one. I like that. Thank you.
Wonderful. And today you're at the beach, so that's just
Yeah,
great.
in spirit.
Swante.
I'm Swantje Wilms, and I'm active with the Pasadena Tenants Union and a member of Lake Avenue Church.
Good to have you again. It's a cliche, but a blast from the past is Terry Dre. Great to see you again, Terry. Go introduce yourself.
Yeah, Terry Dre, farmer. And here because I wish I had the courage of Bob Zaugh, and someday maybe I will.
Very nice preview. Mimi Kennedy.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Yes, I came to ICUJP, I think through Jim Lawson, Blaise Bonpane, Steve Rohde. It was in my activist days helping to form Progressive Democrats of America and being involved in social justice and peace issues. And I'm excited to hear Bob because I saw him yesterday. We're doing Our Town as a reading this weekend. Okay.
Wonderful, Mimi. And as a preview, Mimi will be joining us as a presenter at a future Friday forum to tell us about her life and the intersection of her work and her activism. Chris Panett.
Father Chris Panett, pastor of St. Camillus Catholic Church, part of Pax Christi, along with Olga, and definitely focus with many of you. And good to be with you.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Arvizu, board member, animal welfare advocate, intellectual property and technology attorney, and currently volunteering Jewish Voices for Peace and Code Pig.
Terrific. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am Steve Rohde, the chair of this wonderful group. I'm also active with Death Penalty Focus and serve on that board with Chris Panett. Also the Black Jewish Justice Alliance and the ACLU, and Bend the Arc, a Jewish Partnership for Justice. I'm always eager to hear reflections by Anthony Manousis, and he's doing that today. Anthony.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure to be able to give a reflection to this group. However, when Rick texted me yesterday to remind me that I was supposed to give this reflection this morning, I confess I had completely forgotten. So thanks, Rick, for jogging my memory. But then I realized I would be speaking right after the presidential debate. And I wondered, what the heck am I going to say? My wife Jill and I were deeply disturbed by the performance of both candidates, as you probably were. We agreed that commentators that Trump gave a strong performance and Biden a weak one. Trump spewed outrageous lies with utter conviction and took control with his doomsday narrative and how he alone can fix our ailing nation. Biden talked about policies, positive achievements, but lack of vision that could engage the American public. It is sobering to think that truth may not matter to voters who are concerned that Biden is too old for the job and don't realize or don't care that Trump is delusional. I'm more worried than ever about our soul-sick nation. The idea of another Trump presidency horrifies me, yet it now seems more likely than ever. I know that there are those on the left who detest Biden because of his support for Israel and wouldn't vote for him under any circumstances, even if it means that Trump gets elected. I'm appalled by Biden's policy on Israel, but the Republican alternatives seem infinitely worse. I feel I must support Biden, but my heart is heavy. The issue is not just political, but spiritual. How can we heal the soul of our nation? Well, I don't have an answer to these questions, so I decided to bring you up to speed about my book, which is going well. When I last gave a reflection around the time of my birthday, May 9th, I had just started working on it. It's called Nothing Can Separate Us, A Cancer Journey of Love and Faith, and it's about a cancer journey that I took with my previous wife, a Methodist pastor named Kathleen Ross, 15 years ago. This was a time of despair, the final days of the Bush administration and the financial meltdown. And it was also a time of hope, the election of our first Black president, Barack Obama. Kathleen and I kept a CaringBridge blog that chronicles our journey, which was an interfaith one. Because we were deeply involved in the interfaith movement, people of all faiths rallied around us and supported us. And I am incredibly grateful for that support. So far this summer, I've edited the journal and written an introduction and epilogue, and the book is now at the point where I'm seeking readers and endorsements. Last week, Jill and I missed our Friday forum because we went to the Sarah Catholic Retreat Center in Malibu, a lovely Mexican-style villa on the top of a hill overlooking the ocean. It is very Catholic, but welcomes people of other faiths, such as our friend Hadad Tarifi, who has brought Muslim groups to this center. While we were at the retreat center, I worked on my book, which my wife Jill read for the first time. She gave me a lot of incredibly helpful feedback, and I don't take her support for granted. Not every wife would be as gracious as Jill when her husband is writing a book about his previous wife. But as you know, Jill is an amazing woman, and I can't believe that God has blessed me with two wonderful wives in the course of my life. I'm meeting now with various people who are willing to read the book and provide endorsements. This week, I had lunch with Marianne Swenson, a former Methodist bishop who knew Kathleen and me quite well, and she was incredibly gracious and supportive. She is reading the book and loves it. My Quaker friend Stan Searle of Santa Monica meeting also is reading it and writing a blurb. And today I'm having lunch with Kathleen's oncologist, Dr. Eric McGarry. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting with him. I'm eager to get his views on the book as an oncologist. These meetings have been incredibly healing experiences for me, for which I am grateful. So, our nation may be sick, but it is well with my soul, to use the words of the old Methodist hymn, which has been the soundtrack of my mind all week. So I'd like to conclude my reflection by sharing the story of this famous hymn. Its author was Horatio Spafford, a successful attorney and real estate investor who lost a fortune in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Around the same time, his beloved 4-year-old son died of scarlet fever. Thinking a vacation would do his family some good, he sent his wife and 4 daughters on a ship to England, planning to join them after he finished some pressing business at home. However, while crossing the Atlantic Ocean, the ship was involved in a terrible collision and sank. More than 200 people lost their lives, including all 4 of Horatio Spafford's precious daughters. His wife, Anna, survived the tragedy. Upon arriving in England, she sent a telegram to her husband that began, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" Horatio immediately set sail for England. At one point during the voyage, the captain of the ship, aware of the tragedy that had struck the Spafford family, summoned Horatio to tell him that they were now passing over the spot where the shipwreck had occurred. As Horatio thought about his daughters, words of comfort and hope filled his heart and mind. He wrote them down, and they've since become a well-beloved hymn. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to know, it is well with my soul. So whatever lies ahead, friends, whether it's peace or shipwreck, I have confidence that God will help us to redeem the soul of our nation. I don't know how, but I'm confident that if we're faithful to our callings as peacemakers, it will be well with our souls.
Thank you, Anthony, so much. Exactly what I needed this morning. I remember Kathleen. I remember the beautiful love and friendship you had together, as you do now with Jill. You are twice blessed, absolutely. Your reflection reminds me that ICUJP is what we need. With 23 years under our belt this September, we have outlasted presidents of both parties. We have consistently showed up, not only every Friday, but at demonstrations, at meetings, at caucuses, at delegations to elected officials, at public demonstrations of conscientious objection and lawlessness in the spirit of justice. So it's really ICUJP that is giving me hope. We are nonpartisan under our tax status in the sense that we cannot, as an organization, endorse any candidate for elective office. We're free to express our individual views, as Anthony did in part today. But we're going to be here on November 6th, and we're going to stay the course that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. That's been true under Democratic presidents and under Republican presidents. And it's really the strength of ICUJP, and I think it's why people come back regularly, new people join us, people rejoin us and see that we are still faithful and committed and dedicated to this work. And I'll use my own remarks to encourage you to financially support ICUJP. The invitation you got today has a link that you can make a financial contribution. I know that someone on this screen recently made a monthly commitment to ICUJP. It's very helpful to us to manage our expenses. We're a small group with a small part-time staff and other expenses to keep the doors open, to keep doing this kind of work. So consider ICUJP among the causes that you support. And please be as generous with us as you can be. I've known Bob Zaugh for decades, having met him through his loyal support of Gary Tyler, a man wrongfully convicted of murder. And I'm only using an estimate here, spending 42 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And I think Bob may weave into his remarks some discussion of Gary Tyler. But we really invited Bob Zaugh because of his own work, his life. And it's the kind of life that deserves attention because he's an inspiration. And the more I've learned about Bob, he's so modest. There was so much of his story I never knew for decades because I saw him as a loyal supporter of Gary Tyler. But I've learned more and more about Bob, and it's precisely why we invited him here today to take a long look at his life and for all of us to, I believe, learn some lessons and certainly be inspired. I've set a high bar, Bob, but I really do respect you, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And let me say this, Michelle Obama for president. That's what I want to say. Okay. I'm going to sort of start in the recent few years, and then I'll go back to the very beginning of my political stuff. About 2008 or 9, we decided to put on a reunion of the resistance to get all the people together from the Los Angeles and some from the Bay Area, called The Resistance, a group of draft resistors. And so we brought them all to Jan and Jerry's house in Santa Monica, and people showed up from all over the country and even from England. We had David Harris and Todd Friend, and it was really great. The day of this thing, I had always wanted to thank Judge Pregerson personally for allowing me to defend myself, but I couldn't get through to his office. So it turned out he's in the book. I just called him at his house, you know. He picked up the phone. He goes, "I know you," and you know, I'd sent him some letters, but we talked for 20 minutes, and I learned a lot about what he does. And that what he does is he visits all the people he sends to prison. And he had gone to visit a couple of my roommates that he'd sentenced to prison, and they were in solitary confinement at Lompoc. He thought they were in Safford, Arizona, picking corn, but they weren't. And he went to visit them in the hole at Lompoc, one of whom was fasting for like 30 days. He wouldn't wear clothes, he wouldn't shave. They would dry shave him. And he asked this guy, Michael Schwartz, "Do you want out? I can get you out." And Mike said, "No, I'm fine in here." So Pragerson came back to LA, and he I think he put together a writ of habeas corpus and brought Schwartz into court, and Schwartz still would not recognize anybody or the court, so he wouldn't stand up. They had to lift him up by his armpits to stand for the judge. And then Pragerson dismissed his case, and Mike goes, "Thank you," and left. And I think he came to my trial. It may be a false memory, but we all attended each other's trials. So after doing this reunion, Christopher Colorado Jones started working on the film The Boys Who Said No. And he was a very conscious draft resistor who had resisted the draft at the point of registration. In other words, he was aware of what's up at the age of 18, and I wasn't. You know, I wasn't. And so he started working on this film and started producing it, and it was just about finished when I think it was 5 years ago next week, July 4th. He was gay, and he was hanging up a pride banner for Pride Week, and he fell off a ladder and died. And you know, it put the film off for a while. Finally, he got the film out, and in 2018, Ken Burns made the 18-hour documentary on Vietnam. And I go, wow, finally our story will be told. I can't wait to see it. And I sat down and watched it, and there wasn't one word about draft resistance in that film. Now, I fall asleep a lot. I've never seen a verdict on Law and Order because I fall asleep after the arrest. Then I wake up and it says Dick Wolf on the screen, and there's three people walking down the hallway. So I have to wait till the summer to watch the rerun to see, and I fall asleep again. I've never seen a verdict. So I figure I must have fallen asleep during this film. So I watched the entire thing again, and there was nothing in there. In the meantime, we decided we wanted to get our archive somewhere. And I talked to Sarah Pillsbury, and she said, "Well, call up John Szabo, runs the LA library." So I did. And he answered the phone. And when he heard what we wanted to do, he sent somebody over to the house. They picked up all our archives and took them to the library, where they started organizing them. And then they allowed us to have a big show, I think it was 2 months long, where we got to put our archives up and have speakers and so on. David Harris came down, and so on the side of the library outside, there was a 2-story sign that said, "We won't go," which was our position in the draft resistance. And we were condemned when we were actually refusing induction. Those to see a two-story picture of what we were doing on the wall was very gratifying. So I went to the opening of our archives, and Dave Clinton was there, and our kids went to school together at New West, so I knew him from there. And I go, Dave, I don't know, I watched the thing, and somebody told me it might be the funding for Ken Burns' film that determined the direction of that film. He goes, Bob, it's right up there on the screen. It's the first thing on the screen. It says funded by the Bank of America and David Koch. And I hadn't seen that. And that explains that film. And it really upset me that he wouldn't cover. We ended the draft. That's what the draft resistance did. We ended it. And one of the things I brought along is I used to go down every Wednesday at 10 a.m. I would go to the federal building and I would pick up the indictment list of all the federal indictments in the 9th district. And 35% of them were for refusing induction or failing to show. That was a third of what was going on in Southern California. It was higher in Berkeley. And, I for some reason, I still have all these indictment lists. So I always carry proof with me of what I'm talking about. So I had brought Gary Tyler to speak at Loyola Marymount at the Justice Not Jails Film Festival. I had been asked to help Gary in 1989 or 90. I'd been called up by his lawyer, and I'd been helping him ever since. And in 2016, when he was released after 41 and a half years, I flew back to New Orleans and I brought Gary to Los Angeles, where he still resides. So I brought him to speak at this film festival, and I met a professor at LMU. And so I called her up and I asked her if I could speak in her class. Now, I'm not a public speaker. I'm just not. And she said, okay, she says, you can do it. And I wanted to speak because somebody has to set the historical record straight here. And Ken Burns isn't going to do it. So she said, there may only be 5 people, but you can come. I said, I don't care if there's 1. And for me to speak in public is a big deal, because when I was 12, I was at a Boy Scout camporee, and the scoutmaster, there was 400 kids there. He asked me to get up and lecture the audience on astronomy, because I knew all 89 constellations. I knew all the magnitudes of the brightest stars, and I could point them all out. And it ruined my life. It terrified me. And so I would never speak in public after that. The only time I spoke was at my trial. But I would do anything to avoid public speaking. But this broke me out of that. I wanted to speak. So I went to LMU in early 2018. And one of the first things I said was, there were 20 people. I go, so how many in here are aware of the war in Vietnam? 2 hands went up. That's it. 2. They hadn't even heard of the war because it's not covered. And I was shocked. I was not expecting that. And the professor was shocked. She's been teaching there for 30 years. It never was brought up. And so I've been there. I go every semester. Now I'm asked to attend all of her classes, all of the sessions of her class, to work with students on the power of one and what people can do besides civil disobedience. So I'm there all the time. And there's never been more than 2 hands gone up. It's amazing. So it's important to bring the history of the resistance to people and pass it on, because if you notice, there's a lot of violence and rioting going on, and it's being done differently now. People are wearing masks, and they're not COVID masks. They're putting up wooden pallets to block people from access to see what they're doing, and that creates fear. There may be reasons for doing that, but it creates fear. And at UCLA, it created great violence. And then they also were not talking to the press. They would say, and you could watch this on CNN, go up with a microphone. So what do you guys? Well, I'm not trained to media speak. You have to find somebody that's media trained, but they wouldn't speak to the press. What we did in the resistance, we were Gandhian. We studied Gandhi, and Gandhi was kind of brought to consciousness by James Lawson, who went over to India to study all those things, and then he came back and passed it on to Martin Luther King Jr. And we studied it, when we did our things in the resistance. But let me take you back to the very beginning, to the consciousness of a teenager going into college, only there because I can get a 2S. I'm not really interested in college. I'm at El Camino and I can get a 2S and I can avoid this whole thing. I have a rheumatoid spondylitis also. And so, I wasn't really conscious of the war, but I could see that I might be subject to it. So I kept my 2S. And then when I graduated, I went on to UCLA, and it was there that I heard David Harris. And that changed everything for me, was hearing David Harris. Because I didn't go right into UCLA, I was given a 1A. And, I have all my draft files. We have 4,000 pages of NARA documents on the resistance. I have my FBI file. I've got my draft file and so on. I've got my trial transcript. So I wrote a letter to the draft board saying, I have a physical coming up, and I applied for a 2S. I said I think I should get a 2S because blah blah blah, and I laid that out. And then I sent him another letter saying, I've decided to keep my 1A. And I said, I've been thinking a lot about U.S. involvement in the war, about the inequities of the draft system and the lily white draft boards themselves. If I'm to have any meaningful position or make any meaningful decisions, I feel that I must reject the sanctuary of the 2S deferment. So I'm wishy-washy and I'm going back and forth. I don't know what to do. And then I hear David Harris speak at UCLA, and then I know what to do. Once you heard David Harris, you'd reach for your draft card and burn it or do something with it. And so I decided to become a member of the draft resistance. And so I turned in my draft card on December 4th, 1967. The week before I started hanging out with the draft resistance, we did a Thanksgiving fast on Restaurant Row in La Cienega. We didn't eat for 3 days and so on. I got to meet the people in the resistance, Sherna Gluck, Karen Dellenbach, who's now Winter Dellenbach. The resistance was really led by women. And then Bill Garraway was probably the lead resistor of the men. But a lot of the ideas and the actions came from women. So that in itself made us unique because most things were run by male chauvinist pigs, shall we say, in all over the country, and even well-intentioned draft resistance places, there was male chauvinism, and women weren't considered. But with the LA resistance, it was just the opposite, and we did really creative actions, and we tried to involve the public because we were subject to the draft, but everybody wanted to show, I support you and I'm willing to go down the line and to jail if necessary in order to support you. And so they would sign complicity statements. And many of our events, or some of our events, would have an element of complicity where you're a conspirator, you're breathing together, which is the biggest fear of the government, is breathing together. And so we did things like on October 1st, 1968, Greg Nelson, who was another very conscious non-registrant, he'd refused to register, and they had arrested him, and he put up $1,500 bail, but they wouldn't do anything to him. And finally he said, look, give me my money back or take me to court. So they decided to take him to court. And so they indict him, and he has a case in court. And the week before, I think he saw the movie Beckett again the week before, and he notices that Beckett, he makes them come into the church and get him. And so Greg Nelson sends his mother into court. So we all went to court. His mother goes into court, and she reads a statement that he's going into sanctuary, and they're going to have to arrest him in church in 76th and Figueroa, Adams and Figueroa. It was a church. And so we all went down to that church, and the FBI was everywhere. They were peeking around corners and so on. And Greg didn't want to do this until David Harris flew in from Palo Alto to speak at this sanctuary. And so we were waiting for Harris, and we couldn't figure out how to get him in because the FBI, they were everywhere trying to stop this thing. And finally, we just put him in a car, pulled him up to the front. He got out of the car and walked right through the FBI, right into the church, right up to the altar where we had, I think, Louis Vitale, Harlan Weitzel, and we put these big chains on Greg, and he was chained to Harlan Weitzel and, a couple, religious people. And then the rest of us were chained around him with smaller chains. So we had about 12 resistors, me included, chained, and that makes this a conspiracy. And the FBI came in, they had these giant bolt cutters, but they let this ceremony go on until it was over. And then they cut Greg away and took him to jail, and he went into court and he was sentenced to prison. That's the type of thing we did in the resistance. Other examples of that were, I liken us to what Gandhi did with the salt marches. Like, here's what we're going to do, here's when we're going to do it, and here's where we're going to do it. And that tended to be how the resistance functioned. So on April 3rd, 1968, we had a demonstration at MacArthur Park, where one of our artists made this giant collage. It showed the Detroit riots and so on, all kinds of pictorial stuff. And then people would go up and they would paste their draft card to it. And then we would march, which is a conspiracy, with the evidence and take it to the government at the federal building. And they locked us out. They don't want to see us. And they locked us out. And so Norman Whitty took the draft collage home, where the FBI broke into his house and stole it. And after that happened, one of the chief government prosecutors, Michael Green, quit his job and became the defense attorney to get the collage back. But the most interesting thing that happened out of that was that Norman Whitty had a girlfriend when the collage was stolen. And her father was in the FBI and back in Washington, D.C. And he had some business to do in L.A. And so he decided he would come out and give Norman Whitty a piece of his mind for challenging the government and messing up his daughter's life. And Norman's girlfriend's name was Joan Felt, and her father was Mark Felt, Deep Throat. And this was 2 years before he became Deep Throat. It's an incredible story. So we did those type of things, and the government usually didn't want to deal with our evidence. We would take you the evidence. Here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to do it. Here's when we're going to do it. And here's the evidence. What are you going to do about it? And, I sent along my trial transcript, which I sent to Rick, and he can post it or email it to you. So you can read my trial transcript, which only takes about 25 minutes. But in it, you see that I had the fairest judge in America. I had Judge Harry Pregerson. And even though he'd sentenced 3 of my roommates and they all ended up in Lompoc and they all ended up in the hole, that's who I wanted for my judge. Don't know why. I felt he would let me speak. And so I wanted Pregerson as my judge. And I don't have any control over that. They draw their name out of a hat. But when my arraigning judge turned out to be the worst judge in America, Manuel Rio, I was relieved because that meant he couldn't be the judge in my case. And he forced me to bring advisory counsel, but I was defending myself. And if you read the transcript, you'll see that Pragerson tries to be fair and use every method he could to talk me out of defending myself, that I was doing a disservice to myself. And he pointed out early on that I had 2 indictments. I had 2 felonies. One was for, I had taken the physical and flunked. When I had that 1A, they called me for a physical. I flunked because I had rheumatoid spondylitis. I had it then and I still have it. And so I flunked the physical and I would never pass it. But they had created this sort of bogus deferment called the 1Y, because once you got a 4F during World War II, or when they only had the 4F, you were done with the draft and they had no control over you. They had no way to control your life through fear. So they created the 1Y, which would keep you running in this maze, keep you running. And so that meant that they had to give you a physical every year. So I had a 1Y and I turned that in. And then they called me for a physical. And this time I went and publicly refused it. It's a totally separate indictment from refusing induction. So I had 2 indictments. They were each for 5 years. And Pregerson pointed out to my advisory council and confirmed with them that I understood that he could give me consecutive sentences. And so I could, instead of facing 5 years, I faced 10. And instead of facing a $10,000 fine, I faced 20. And once he confirmed all that, he let me defend myself in court. And the first thing out of my mouth was, you read in the transcript, is I admitted that I violated these laws. Like right, the first thing I say is I did on, I think it was May 29th, refused to take a physical, and on August 27th, I refused to induction. Two different events, months apart, both felonies. And then I said, but that's not what I want to cover here. And so when I started speaking, the Arnold Regardi, the prosecuting attorney, objected to me speaking, and Pregerson said, I will hear what Mr. Zaugh has to say. And he let me do everything I wanted in the style that I wanted. And I really appreciated that. And then he was looking for a way to get me out, because he was tired of putting resistors in jail. And he asked my advisory council if there was anything that showed that I was speeded up. Make an argument, do something, make an argument. It was what he was asking them. And they brought up 2 cases, Breen versus US and Gutnick versus the US. I was familiar with those cases. They didn't apply to me. The government made sure when they finally got around to indicting me that they dotted the I's and crossed the T's. They did nothing wrong. But all Pregerson wanted was the argument. And what he did was he acquitted me of refusing to induction. And they had a gentleman's agreement to give you 3 years if you were indicted, if you were convicted of refusing induction. Seems illegal, probably is, but that's the way it was in LA. But they didn't have anything for refusing to take a physical. And so he felt he could do what he wanted there. I had a meeting with a probationary meeting or something, and the guy listened to me and, yes, Mr. Zaugh, it's very interesting what you're saying. And then he wrote it up and said, this guy needs to be taken off the streets. And he sent that to Pregerson. And Pregerson's sentenced me to work in the national interest, which is similar to a conscientious objector, which I was not. I was a resistor, total non-cooperator. I'd moved from turning in a draft card to total non-cooperation. And I told them, I sent a letter to them. I said, look, I print for Peace Press. We print for the Communist Party, the Black Panthers, the ACLU, and that's in the national interest. That's what I'm going to do. He should have thrown me in jail. He didn't do anything at all. And I worked for Peace Press. That's what I did. And I worked there for 20 years, and I met all kinds of people. I met Susan Grode and, Matt Groening, and, Blaise Bonpane would come to lunch. We met everybody at Peace Press because we printed for everybody. And groups we printed for was the Red Tide. The Red Tide were radical students from University High. And they put out a paper called The Red Tide. And we printed the first issue at Peace Press. And they were immediately expelled from school. Big mistake. Their leader was a guy named Michael Letwin, and his father was Leon Letwin. He was a law professor at UCLA, and they took Uni High to court and kicked their ass. They kicked their ass. And they not only kept running that paper, they ran the paper for about 10 years. And so when they graduated from high school, they kept the paper going, and they were like radical socialists, and they moved to Oakland and Detroit and kept on putting out the paper, and they were supporters of Gary Tyler. And some of them went to jail for Gary Tyler, at demonstrations for Gary Tyler in his case. And they set up a demonstration in Detroit in 1976. That's when Gary's trial was, and we were printing for it, Peace Press. And they talked Rosa Parks into leading the demonstration. That's how effective the Red Tide was. And when it was over, Michael Letwin drove to Louisiana, and he drove to Gary Tyler's mother's house, met his mother and his brother and so on. Meanwhile, Gary was sentenced to prison, and he was sentenced to death. And he had an execution date of May 1st, 1976. In 1989, I was called up by Mary Howell. That was his attorney. And she said, do you know who Gary Tyler is? I said, yeah, we printed for his trial back in 76. She says, do you know somebody named Steve Orell? I go, yeah, he was a member of the Red Tide. I remember he was a high school kid that did a printing job at Peace Press. No high school kids came into Peace Press, just the Red Tide. And I remembered him. And she said, well, he gave us your name as somebody who might be able to help Gary. We feel we have the votes to get him out of prison, but we got to get him out of this state because this state is racist. And, they have a thing about Gary Tyler. And, he was innocent. They planted a gun in the butt. It's just horrible. A gun stolen from a police firing range. How's a black teenager going to get onto a police firing range to get a gun? That doesn't make sense. Anyway, I did know Steve Orell, and she said, well, he gave us your name, and Gary has studied graphic arts, and we were wondering if you guys could offer him a job at Peace Press. I said, well, I said, there isn't a Peace Press. We sold it, but let me see what I can do. And I talked to the guy that bought it, and I had no money, talked him into getting us on a plane and flying to New Orleans and driving to Angola prison with Gary's lawyer. And once you meet Gary Tyler, it's where do I sign? What do you want me to sign? I'll sign anything. And so Gary Schaffner from NPA offered Gary Tyler a job. And but he wasn't scheduled to get out, and he didn't get out for another 26 years. But I kept working on it. I knew that that when he did get out, if he did get out, that job might not be there, that business might not be there, which was in fact the case. They no longer did printing. But I worked with Deborah Constance. I worked with Bob Timmons, who was a nationally recognized private parole officer, armed robber of banks, who was now given to, he would be the private parole officer for Mike Tyson and the entire band of Steven Tyler and Aerosmith. He was, he walked them through sobriety, and everybody worked with Bob Timmons. And whoever I asked to work with me on this helped. They all said yes. Liz Forer, who ran the Venice Family Clinic for 27 years, right online. Everybody did what we wanted. So in 2016, I brought Gary to Los Angeles, got him his jobs. I raised a couple $100,000 for him because he'd never had a job. He was arrested at 16, so he didn't have any money in Social Security. And you have to have 10 years or 40 quarters of employment to collect. It meant he wouldn't collect Social Security until he was 69 years old. Now, here's an amazing story. And that is, they made this film, Cast the First Stone, about Gary, and I got a copy of it. And the producer and the director of it invited me. He said, they're going to do the play. They're going to do the play where Gary directs a play about the life of Christ inside Angola prison with prisoners. And he didn't want to do it because he said, I'm not a Christian. I can't do this play. He says, you go ask the ministers. There's plenty of ministers in the churches inside Angola. There were 6,000 prisoners. Go ask one of them. And they all said the same thing. Nobody can do this play but Gary Tyler. They go back to Gary and he makes a deal breaker. He knows they can't do this. He goes, I will only do it if men play the men's roles and women play the women's roles. I won't do it unless that happens. Well, this is a men's prison. The nearest women's prison is 50 miles down the Mississippi. And the warden thinks it over and he goes, let's do it. And so now Gary has to do the play, and they cast, they go down they send a bus down the Mississippi for over a year and a half to bring these women to rehearse this play. And they put on this play, this Oscar-nominated documentarian, Jonathan Stack, had made a movie about Angola that had been Oscar nominated. And he heard that they were doing this play, so he asked if he could film a couple hours just so he'd have more footage on what goes on at the prison. But when he saw what was going on, he goes, this is a movie. And they turned it into a movie. So I was invited to see the play. And I went to the play and I got lost. And the guards came up to me and who are you? What are you doing here? I was lost behind the rodeo grounds. They said, who are you? I said, my name's Bob Zaugh. He goes, oh, well, we're expecting you. They go, we're expecting you. We'll take you over to see Gary. I said, well, I don't want to see Gary. He's directing this play. So they take me over. They put me in the grandstand. There's a few hundred people at this play. And Gary comes over to me at the break and he said, we have a couple lawyers here from LA. I'd like to introduce them to you after the play's over. I said, okay, fine. So these two lawyers one of them had gone to school with Mary Howell, Gary's lawyer. And they went to visit Mary Howell and they go, so where's Gary these days? They figured he was out of prison. They said, he's in prison. He can't get out of prison. He says, but he's doing a play this week and you should go see it. So they come to see the play. So after the play, Gary brings these people over to me and they're introduced to me and I asked the question, so where did you practice law? And they go, we're retired. I always ask the extra question. So I said, where did you practice law? They said, well, it was a place called the Bar Sinister. I said, you mean Livesey and Taylor? And their jaws dropped. They go, how would you know that? I said, you were our lawyers at Peace Press in 1978. So I've run into my own lawyers inside a prison 2,000 miles away from my house. And they go, what can be done for Gary? Is anything happening for Gary? I said, yes, and I'm in charge. And they said, well, what can be done? I said, well, when he gets out, and he wasn't scheduled to get out, he needs a place to live. And they said, he can live with us for at least 2 months. He lived with him for a year. And then I spun this idea off the top of my head. I go, what we need, because he has no Social Security, we need to raise money for him because he's starting at the bottom. We need to have a tax deductible fund so that people can donate to the fund and they get a tax write-off and Gary gets the money. I said it should be with somebody like Liberty Hill. And the woman, and Steve White says, I'm on the board of Liberty Hill. And Paula Litt of Litt, Livesey and Taylor is president of the board. And so we set up the Gary Tyler Back to Life Recovery Fund at Liberty Hill, hoping to get $10,000 or $20,000. We got about $80,000 in that fund. It's still up. They're going to shut it down in about a year, but it's still going. So one of the next things I did was the Red Tide asked me if I could persuade Gary to come to their Zoom 50-year reunion. And I said, I'll talk to Gary, because Gary didn't know who they were. He has followers in Europe, and the band UB40 are big followers. And I said, Gary, the Red Tide are the biggest followers that you have in the world, period. There's nobody that can touch them. People have gone to jail for you in this group. You need to come to their Zoom. And so we did. And they just gelled. This was in 2021. And so I said, look, I'm going to put on Gary's 65th birthday in 2023. And I think you guys should come and have a live reunion at the birthday to meet Gary in person. And they did. And 16 of them came to Jan and Jerry's, where this was my third fundraiser at Jan and Jerry's. I'd raised $40,000 for Gary at previous, because I had the Chambers brothers, and we'd raised all this money. So I was doing one more thing. And so they came to this reunion. I had Frankie Carrillo, Mike Farrell, I had Joe Chambers in our band, and it was amazing. We had these Red Tiders there. And what they had done was the Red Tide had been written about in the LA Times in 1971 by Doug Smith. And so they contacted Doug Smith, and he came to the Red Tide. He came to Gary's birthday. And so I briefed him more about Gary, because I knew the most about Gary. So I gave him a bunch more facts about Gary. And people were crying. It was an amazing event. And so then that was in July, and Gary became famous. I raised money for his art studio so that he could make quilts. And now he's an internationally recognized artist. In 1 year, he's became internationally famous. He's going to be, his show sold out in Detroit. He was in Forbes magazine, the New York Times, Detroit Free Press. He's going to be at Art Basel. He doesn't even know what it is. He's going to be at Art Basel. They gave him an award in Santa Monica at Frieze LA, and the award was given at Steven Spielberg's house. His agent is Ari Emanuel. My God, his brother is Rahm Emanuel. He's got the biggest agent in the world, is handling Gary's events. So I'll be seeing less of him. But so what happened next was I go to Judge Pregerson's grave every Memorial Day and every Veterans Day. And after he died, I was contacted by Oscar-winning director Terry Sanders, and he said, "I'd like to film, just run some film at the memorial. Can you?" So I contacted the some of the interns and externs and clerks, and we got to film the reunion or the memorial of Harry Pregerson. And when Dean Pregerson and Terry Sanders looked at it, they go, "There's a film here." And they made it into a film. It's called Ninth Circuit Cowboy, The Long Good Life of Harry Pregerson. It's on Amazon Prime. And if you know law schools we can show it at, Terry Sanders and Dean Pregerson and I, we do Q&A after the film. So we show it in law schools because people need models of integrity, and that's who Harry Pregerson was. So I go to his grave every Memorial Day and Veterans Day. So I went there last Veterans Day, and this guy wearing a suit is walking across the cemetery. There's nobody there. It's like 9 a.m. He goes, "I know you, you're Bob Zaugh." And he said, "I'm Doug Smith." So he's been given this weird assignment by the Times to go to the cemetery, and he runs into me at the cemetery. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I come to Pregerson's grave every Veterans Day and Memorial Day because I'm so grateful for this guy. I've got to pray at his grave. That's what I have to do. I just need to do it." And from that, he had a photographer with him, and they took some pictures. And he said, "I'm going to send this to the weekend editor that sent me down here, and maybe they'll run it." I go, "Fat chance, there's no chance." And sure enough, they said, "There's no way we're running a picture of a draft resistor on Veterans Day. Not going to happen." But Doug Smith felt there was a story there, and he's right, you know. And he waited a few months, and he went to Column One. That's the key place in the LA Times where writers get their story published. So he got the story into Column One just a couple of weeks ago, and it was all about this relationship between Pragerson and I, and it ends with the word "thank you." It's like I'm at his grave praying, and I say thank you. And I felt like, well, it wouldn't have been more impactful if you mentioned that I was facing 10 years and not 5. But no, it wouldn't. He organized this story in such a way that it's perfect. It's perfect about this relationship between Pragerson and I. And I took Gary Tyler to meet Pragerson. That's how I finally got to thank him in person, was I took Gary Tyler to meet him. And I thought we were going to get 10 minutes, and we got 2.5 hours. And I thought we were going to go have coffee at the restaurant next door. But when his interns and externs found out that Gary Tyler was coming, to go, "You're not going to some restaurant. You're having it here in this room with all of us." Because they not only wanted to hear what Gary had to say, they love hearing what Harry Pregerson has to say. And you'll see it in the film Ninth Circuit Cowboy, that he honors women. You have a baby, he set up childcare in his office. It was a long suite of offices. Bring the kid in. He has pictures down the wall of all of the people, 8x10 pictures of all the people who've been interns and clerks for him. There's like 100 and some pictures. And attached to the pictures are the pictures, the little snapshots of their children. He honored everybody. And my life now is about this. I feel I need to honor the integrity and the people around me who meant so much, which brings me back to the resistance. And the important thing about one of the things I learned the resistance, I sent along a copy of one page of the newspaper we handed out on our 8-week thing. I don't know if Rick can put that up, but if not, it's a editorial from David Harris that was posted in the New York Times in 2017. It says, "We are all responsible for what our country does. Doing nothing is picking a side. We are never powerless. Under the worst of circumstances, we control our own behavior. We are never isolated. We have a constituency of friends and family who watch us. That is where politics begins. Reality is made by what we do, not what we talk about. Values that are not embodied in behavior do not exist." And so the important thing for me has become that rule of constituency that David Harris mentions. And in the film, The Boys Who Said No, you get to see the rule of constituency happen in the film. You see a draft resistor named Randy Keeler, who starts off pretty much like I did, going to marches and then timidly turning in his draft card and then sitting down and getting arrested and going to Santa Rita a couple times and then going to court defending himself and going to prison. And one of the visitors he has in prison is Daniel Ellsberg. And that visit is what created the Pentagon Papers, because Ellsberg wanted to know what he could do. And I met Ellsberg before the Pentagon Papers. A draft resistor friend was house sitting for Ellsberg on PCH in a beach house. And I was there visiting my friend when Ellsberg came bursting in the front door, and he had this big press conference he was going to hold that was going to end the war. It was like a 6-page distillation of the Pentagon Papers, and he thought that would, and it didn't end the war. In fact, I never heard that press conference, but I met him before the Pentagon Papers, and it was that visit with Randy Keeler, which is in our film. You get to see the rule of constituency in real life, and it's in the film. And another act of constituency is also with Daniel Ellsberg, but it's not in the film. It's with his dad. And in 1978, Ellsberg is talking to his father, and his father had quit his job, and he was working on the not only atom bomb, but the H bomb. And his father had quit his job, and he was without work for a couple years. And here it is, 30 years later, and Daniel's visiting his father, and he goes, "Why did you quit your job?" And he said, "Well, I was working on the H bomb." He had this big job. He built the plants that built the bombs that we think. And he says, and I was in charge of that. And Ellsberg has all of the documents. He says, "No, that nobody knew about that was on high security." He says, "I was the only person that could build it. And I was on the list of people that had to know everything." And he says, "What happened was you came home from Harvard one day and you were crying, and you had the book by some guy who'd written about Hiroshima. And it was John Hersey, and the book was Hiroshima. And he was crying, and he told his dad, 'You got to read this book.' And it was the reading of that book that his son gave him that caused the Daniel Ellsberg's father to quit his job, and he couldn't get a new job. And that's an act of constituency. And this whole meeting here is an act of constituency. People have been coming here for 20 years. There's all sorts of people here who've had that effect on others. And so if we act with integrity, I think we will affect others. And I know that I've affected others. People have asked me, "Please drive me to the Nevada test site so I can get arrested with you." It's for real. There's a couple a couple others I might want to mention, and it's with David Harris. When David Harris got out of prison, there was a guy, he was trying to stop the Constellation from going back to Vietnam. And he was a guy who'd gone to the Naval Academy, which is like it's West Point, but for the Navy. And he become a jet pilot, but he refused to fly in Vietnam. He was trying to organize people to not let the Constellation go to Vietnam in San Diego, which is a big Navy town. And so Harris got out, and he brought with him the constituency actions of what he learned when he went to Mississippi, which was referendums, where people who couldn't vote had these referendums where they showed what would happen if they did vote, Black people without the vote. And he brought that back with him, and he suggested to this guy, John Kent, said, why don't we have a referendum? And so they did. And they got 70,000 people to vote on this referendum, and I think it was 80% said that we need to keep this ship at home. It didn't stay at home, but it's an act of constituency. One other one is Mitch Snyder. I don't know how many of you know who Mitch Snyder is, but he was a car thief. You know, he'd had a life. I get he went to college and so on, but at some point he stole a car. His life was off the rails, and he ended up in prison. And he was sent to Danbury, and he ended up in this class inside prison, taught by Philip and Daniel Berrigan, the Berrigan brothers. They were teaching community action inside the prison. And Mitch Snyder was in that class. And when he got out of prison, he became the biggest advocate of certain type of civil disobedience that this country has ever had. One of the first things he did was he went on a hunger strike because the government was naming a nuclear destroyer battleship Corpus Christi. So you have a ship armed with missiles called the Body of Christ. And so Mitch Snyder went on this hunger strike for, I don't know, it was like 40 days. And the government decided to name it the city of Corpus Christi. They struck that compromise. And then he went after the government to give one of the buildings away because they have a lot of buildings, as city of LA does, that aren't used. They're unused, and he wanted the shelter. And so he went on this hunger strike, which was ending on 60 Minutes. He was on 60 Minutes. He was dying. I think he was like 40 some days into this hunger strike. And it was, I think it was coming up on election. Anyway, Reagan saw that and he goes, here's your shelter. He gave him the shelter. And so one of the things I did was I flew all over the country to interview people who did major civil disobedience. Ramsey Clark, David Harris, Daniel Ellsberg, Ryan Wilson, who lost his legs on the railroad tracks, Cesar Chavez, David Hayden. And I flew back to Washington, D.C. to see Mitch Snyder. And I met him, and his guy was really forceful. I can probably send an email that's got the words he spoke in it, and they're really powerful. His words tell you how serious he is. And so they were doing this thing called Housing Now, which started it started at Christmas, and it was lasting till April, Easter Sunday. And they wanted you to come to Washington, D.C. and stay homeless. And you could come for the whole time, or you could come when you had time. And then the last day, they were going to go to the Capitol and sleep on the Capitol grounds, which is illegal. You get arrested for that and taken to jail. And so I interviewed Mitch, and on the last week of the demonstration, I flew to Washington, D.C., and I went to the D Street shelter, which is a really dangerous place. A lot of drugs in there. And then we we slept under a bridge. It was 25 degrees at night. So we stayed homeless. And then we would march to the Capitol every day and picket and so on. And we got to the last day, and Congress had decided that they were going to give a pass to this demonstration. They were going to let people sleep on the Capitol grounds because that would erase the whole arrest, that would get rid of the publicity for Housing Now. So they were going to allow us to sit on to go to sleep on the Capitol grounds. But once they left, it's a very segregated situation in DC and most places. People don't talk to each other. bureaucracies don't talk to each other. So Congress has said we can sleep there, but the police say, if you lay down, we're arresting you. So they had a big phalanx of motorcycle cops there. And so we decided we would march through town and we'd go and sit on the lawn and not go to sleep unless people wanted to. And then because families had come, there was about 150 people there. It included families, and it would look like we were tricking them into doing civil disobedience if they laid down, thinking that we could lay down and we couldn't. And so we'd come to this compromise. But Mitch Snyder, who hadn't shown up all week, he shows up at 9:30 and he goes, "How come nobody's sleeping?" And he goes up to the police and he goes, "Look, I'm going to go to sleep right over there. And if you can't find me, ask anybody where I am." And he went over and he laid down under like a big lamp. So he's not only visible, he's spotlit. And about an hour or so later, the police came over to try to break up our thing. And they were standing 10 feet from him. They are scared of this guy. There's no way any group is going up against Mitch Snyder in the United States of America. And he committed suicide about 6 months later. But they were afraid of him. And finally, the rest of us, we just laid down and went to sleep, and they didn't do anything to us. And in the morning, I got up, went to the airport, and flew back to LA. But those are elements of the rule of constituency. And so what I do is I speak at Loyola Marymount, and after I deal with the rule of constituency and so on, and what people can do, I talk about the power of one, which is like Greta Thunberg holding up a sign. And now look at her. It's Cesar Chavez going, starting out one living room at a time to create the United Farm Workers. And it could be any of us. And the most visible suggestion for me in LMU is this woman who, this minister had taken over the Baptist church in Venice. It's in the hood in Venice. And he decided to sell the church, which is kind of illegal. And he sold it to Jay Penske, the son of Roger Penske, the big auto magnate. Jay Penske owns the Hollywood Reporter. He sold this church to Jay Penske, and people don't know what to do about it. One woman, black activist, walked up the stairs with a sign about 7 years ago. She held a sign about the illegality of this. And gradually over time, other people joined her and more people joined her. And then the Venice Beachhead got involved. The writer John Wolfe got involved. And finally, I think it was a year or so ago, Penske had to give the church back. And you know who stepped in? This, to me, the secret mayor of Santa Monica is Patty Hoffman. Don't tell anybody. But she set up like the community housing in Santa Monica and so on. And so Santa Monica came in and they funded getting the church and all its land, even though they're in Santa Monica, back to Venice and the people that are part of that church. And there's also room on the church land to build some community housing. And that happened through one woman going up to the top of the stairs and sitting there with a sign. So that's what I do. I try to act with integrity. I try to point out the power of one, that you don't necessarily have to do civil disobedience. There's plenty you can do. I talk about the women such as Allison Hurst, who built Safe Place for Youth, where Gary worked for the last 8 years. She's created the biggest thing in LA County for, kids who are in foster care. You term out, there's no place to go. You end up in the streets. So I talk to people about, here's what you can do with the power of one. And then I try to act with integrity. And then what I do is I do a lot of praying. This is a ICUJP. You understand prayer? I pray for a couple hundred people every day in my life. I pray for their health and opportunity. If they're I pray for their remission, if it be God's will. I pray for the people that have passed. I pray for them. I pray for Harry Pregerson every day. I pray for Bill Rosendahl, the city councilman, a man of great integrity, every day. So I think that's all I have to say. I find that prayer works. What I want to do is I want to represent these souls who have passed away in my life on behalf of their life. I want to carry it forward. It's not me trying to be holy. It's me trying to make the most use of my life. And I'm in the bell lap of life. I got to get it done now. And so that's how I do it, with prayer and political action. And, I'm speaking at LMU, so I'm speaking specifically to 18 to 22-year-olds. And hopefully there's ways that this group can find inroads into, bringing more people that are younger into this group or other groups you're involved in. So thanks for listening to me.
Bob, wow, thank you. Really remarkable. It's just a journey with a person of conscience. It's really remarkable, Bob. I've got a lot of notes. I'm going to recognize people in a moment. I want to just capture a couple things. So I sent Rick photographs of Gary's quilt because among a whole cluster of follow-up questions and comments for Bob, I too have been moved by the story of Gary Tyler throughout his life, and culminating most recently at our death penalty focused dinner last May. Bob was there, Gary was there, and we displayed Gary's quilt, one of Gary's quilts. This is such a phenomenal story because you've heard in part Gary's case. I mean, a 16-year-old on a bus, convicted of murder with a planted weapon. I've invited Gary to join us. He has a commitment on Friday mornings, and we're going to try to work out a way to have Gary join us to tell his full story. As Bob says, anybody who meets Gary Tyler is a friend of Gary, an FOG for life. So I want this group to meet him if possible. Here is Gary and Mike Farrell, our wonderful friend and supporter, president of Death Penalty Focus. That is just one of Gary's extraordinary quilts. And while that's on the screen, my point was, and Bob has said this, that Gary had no hatred when he left prison for the 41 and a half years he had been incarcerated. I understand as he left prison, the warden was emotionally moved that he would be missing Gary, that Gary was leaving the prison because he had had such an influence on all of the inmates, but not just the inmates, the guards and the personnel at Angola prison. That's the power of a human being like Gary Tyler. And now he's been able to transform his spirit into this extraordinary career as an international award-winning quilt maker. So that's one piece I definitely wanted to follow up on. I've got some other thoughts. I'm going to first go to Bob because he obviously has a reaction to that, and then I'm going to call on people. Bob?
Yes. Yeah, there's another story, when he got out of prison, he had followed his own case. And one of the things that happened was there were a lot of dances to raise money during his trial. And this kid went to a dance, a black kid in New Orleans. When he came out, these white guys drove by in a truck and they blew him away, killed him. And so one of them went to prison for 10 years. Meanwhile, Gary never got out of prison. And Gary had followed that. And this guy he was like 19 years old, and his girlfriend was pregnant. And so when Gary got out of prison, they wouldn't tell anybody that Gary was being released from prison. That's how hot his case is. It's that racist. So um, he called up this woman who was now 40 years old, and she'd had a kid or something, and he said that he was Gary Tyler. She goes, "This is not funny. Gary's in prison. Please don't call me again." Gary says, "You can go on TV. It's all over TV. I would like to talk to you." And they got her. I think that they had her come to um, the law office the next day, and Gary said, "Look," he says, "I followed what happened to you, your boyfriend, so on, all these years." And he said, "I would, if it's okay with you, I would like to be your godfather and help support you in the future." That's unbelievable. I mean, people just would burst into tears when they hear that story. And so, that's what he did. It's just one of the many things that he did.
Thank you, Bob, for that. All right, let's just take some comments and questions. Phil Way.
Yeah, hi, thank you. That was an amazing journey you shared with us. And I have some stories I want to share and ending with a question. Uh, I grew up in the Quaker community, kind of in the World War II era and following. Um, and one of some of the things that impacted me most was that we had both conscience objectors and draft resistors in the Quaker community here. And one of those draft resistors, uh, while in prison, he met two other groups of people who were there for the same reason. Some were Mennonites and some were Hopi Indians. And I don't know how many of you know that the Hopi tribe is a pacifist tribe, and they resisted war. And the upshot of that was that the Pacific Aqua School and the Quaker meeting here ended up with a long relationship with the Hopi tribe. And my dad used to take groups of kids out there to learn about the culture and meet the people. And it was very, very fascinating. Um, and then during in the this was pre Vietnam, and I was turning 18 and facing registry for the draft, and I was absolutely torn apart. I hated the military. I didn't want anything to do with them. And I was actively thinking about becoming a resistor and not registering. And it was tearing me up. And I really didn't talk to anybody about it, but I kicked a hole in a building in our backyard in my frustration. And my mother sent me to a counselor, but we never talked about the draft issue. But anyway, I finally did register and did a alternative draft service. But it's interesting because in the years that followed, when I was a young man, um, I had two friends who had Quaker connections. One was very close to me, as my roommate, but they had military fathers, and they were getting involved in the Quaker community, and they were torn. And the guy who was my roommate finally settled and registered for the draft. And when he was in boot camp, he realized he really was a CO. and how the hell to get out of there. And so he applied for CO status while in the military. They put him in the brig for a while and then released him to go do an alternative service. But one of the things he did, as just a very interesting tactic, when he was in boot camp, he started singing peace songs in the barracks. And that really helped him get out. Anyhow, I have one more to share. I met a guy who he had been a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and he decided he wanted out. And so he went through the steps to try to get out and spent some brig time and finally got out. And he went to medical school. And then he went to El Salvador during the Civil War and served behind the lines as a medical doctor under a pseudonym. And this same man later became the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Anyway, these are some of the stories that surrounded my life. But my question for you is, it sounds like your career was draft resistor from listening to your stories. And I would find myself wondering if you had a side gig to pay the bills.
Well, he was a printer, but you answer it, Bob.
Yeah, the Peace Press was set up by the Draft Resistance and SDS, and I stayed with it. That's where I decided I would do my penalty that they sentenced me to. So I stayed with it till the end. I was the president of it. It was a worker-owned company, but somebody has to be the fall guy with the banks. That was me. So I stayed there till it ended. And then I went to work for Matt Groening of The Simpsons, and I was there until I got laid off a couple of years ago. So I had plenty to do, and Peace Press was connected to everybody.
Anyway, it just sounded like you wouldn't have had time to make a living.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for sharing your
Thank you,
story.
Phil. So we always face this problem. We have 3 hands. Please make short comments or questions. Shwansha.
Yeah, hi. I think I got a little bit of an idea by what Phil just said, but could you clarify what the difference is between a conscientious objector and I think you said you were a draft resistor?
Sure. Conscience objector is a realistic alternative for people who they don't want to serve in the fighting, and so they can do alternative service, work in the hospitals, they can become a medic and so on. But it's part of the system, and I decided that I wanted the whole system to come down, so I became a resistor and a total non-cooperator. So I did not ever apply for a CO. I respect that. I respect the people that serve. One of my closest friends is Ron Kovic. I've known him since he got out. But my position was to be a non-cooperator, and I maintained that position once I got into it.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you both. Dave Clennon. Dave, you were mentioned earlier by Bob before you may have come on the screen, so I want you to know that.
Thank you. Thanks for telling me. Bob, I got a couple questions for you. There was a parallel movement on the East Coast to what you all were doing out here. It was called the New England Resistance, and I think it included New York too. And that group did draft card burnings and turn-ins, and 4 people were indicted for encouraging young men to resist the draft. Benjamin Spock, the Reverend William Sloane Coffin, who was chaplain at Yale at the time, and a very young man named Michael Ferber, who was, in a sense, the New England equivalent of David Harris. And there was a book written about it. I probably won't be able to. You can barely see it. Confronting the War Machine. I don't know how to show it. By Michael S. Foley, Confronting the War Machine, Draft Resistance During the Vietnam War. So and the New England resistance was, I think, operating separately from the West Coast resistance. And so I had one question is how much you knew about the New England resistance, but the bigger question is, what do you think was the impact of the draft resistance movement in this country on the leadership of the war, on the White House and the Defense Department and the State Department? What do you think the resistance accomplished?
Okay, it's only my opinion, but for starters, I had a 2-hour interview with Ramsey Clark, and he kind of confirmed that we pretty much ended the draft. And so in our tactics, that's why I want to speak to people now, because the tactics that are being used there's a lot of violence around, and people could at least look at what we did and our style of action, and maybe incorporate some of the things we do and what's going on today. So I think we ended the draft, and I know that Nixon, as any president would say, I'm not going to listen to protests. I'm not going to. But secretly, I think he looked out the window, and somewhere in one of his books, like he knew he couldn't pull this off anymore, and that was like the whole movement coming together. But I think the resistance on the West Coast, we did a lot of drugs, by the way, in Los Angeles resistance. Just saying. And I don't think Michael Ferber and those people were doing it. They were much more serious, but we got a lot done out here. And let me tell you one quick story. I went to a trial, Jack Whitten's trial, one of the at Pregerson's court, and Bill Garraway came up to me after the trial. He said, "Look, there's a big conference outside Chicago of the draft resistance, the first one, and I can't go. I want you to go." And he gave me this guy's ID. I don't know why, Howard Ingber. And we want to prevent a Trotskyite takeover of the resistance. So here's 74 hits of mescaline, and we want you to fly back there and pass it out. And so I'd never really been on a plane before, and I was really naive. I'm not an academic. I'm not really very smart. I got on the plane. I flew back to Chicago. I got off. It was snowing, and I got on a train. I took the train through the city to Stoughton Lynn's house. He was already at the conference. The next day, I took the train to the conference, and there were all these radicals speaking. It's where I first heard the term male chauvinism. I'd never heard it before, and I was getting to see it in action. And then later on in the day, I passed out the mescaline. And when the sun went down, we were on a lake covered with snow, and it was a full moon, and we passed out the mescaline. And that ended the Trotskyite takeover immediately. It was over.
Bob,
Not necessarily proud of it, but that's what happened, and want to get the truth out there.
Bob, I'm glad the statute of limitations has expired on drug distribution. We really need short comments or questions. Rebecca.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for all you've done. I'm really inspired. I have a question. If you can maybe provide a little bit more guidance on what we can do for de-escalation. You mentioned that you are concerned about the confrontational behavior you're seeing at some of these protests. Another friend of mine mentioned the same thing yesterday, and but especially with the police that she was concerned with. But when I'm marching with like the ACLU or Black Lives Matters, part of their standard chants are against the police and equating them with fascists, racists, KKK. And you mentioned that you've seen coverage when CNN has covered these confrontations. What comes to mind is like reporters like Dana Bash and Jake Tapper on CNN equated these protesters with Nazis blocking Jewish students on the college campuses, when we had a completely different reporting from Democracy Now! Who said that the students were like trying to screen anyone who came near their encampment. They weren't singling out the Jewish students. So how do we de-escalate in these situations and limit the rhetoric and the false narratives?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that, but I see this, everything is like a fabric, and I'm on the strand of that fabric, which is nonviolent direct action, which might include fasting and so on. And so I always want to stick with what I'm doing. I didn't notice anybody fasting, which could be done in the open, which seemed to work for Mitch Snyder. So I would continue on with my strand of what's going on and see how it might affect people. And hopefully they might take notice of people around them. I think it was Gary Tyler hired an apprentice, and she just graduated from UCLA. And so she was like somebody who would talk to the people inside. And I asked her to send me what was going on inside. And it was really well organized inside those compounds, but they were blocked by wooden pallets. So the only people that know what was going on in there, well, I'm one of the only ones, because she sent me their from dawn to dusk schedule. They had outside speakers. They had a lot of stuff that was going on that was wonderful that nobody knows about. But I would continue to do what I do the way I do it.
Thank you, Bob. Anthony.
Well, Bob, I just want to say how much I appreciate your approach, especially your emphasis on prayer. That's something that our nonprofit, Making Housing and Community Happen, that's an integral part of how we do our work. It's worked well for us in terms of on many levels. And same thing with our vigils that we have here in Pasadena around Gaza and the Palestinian cause. We include prayer in every single vigil we hold. And I think it's helped us to stay focused, and it's helped us to be successful. So I want to thank you for bringing that up. Also, Judge Pregerson is a hero for people in the affordable housing world. I had no idea his other side that you brought up today, and that was fascinating to learn about him and how you've recognized that he played a very important role in your life. I want to end by a question, a very personal kind of question. Were you involved with the resistance at the Orange Grove meeting here in Pasadena? Or do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I was going to apologize after you finished speaking. I was going to apologize. Yes, we lived in your church for at least 30 days.
Yes.
That was part of that. We had one Navy, one Army, one Marine guy. They were all intentionally AWOL, and they stayed inside the church. And once again, our style was to make it available to everybody. So, it made it a conspiracy. But the FBI just would not come in there. They just wouldn't come in there. And we would be there for your Sunday Quaker meetings and be part of it. And I was really impressed by that place.
Yeah, I'd love to get you to come and speak at our Quaker meeting. So let's make that happen.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Sure. I apologize.
No, that's great.
Bob, it's obvious you've overcome or rechanneled your reluctance to speak publicly. You've done a wonderful job today, and I do hope, and I gather you are continuing now to speak at colleges and I encourage you to continue to tell this story. I want to capture Donna Buell, please.
Hi, thank you so much. What a world you've opened up there. There's something right now in the California legislature that's very concerning. The Senate Bill 1081, it would automatically register young men from age 26 down for the draft when they sign up for a driver's license. And this has been moving through the California legislature. It's going to the Transportation Committee on July 1st. And the Friends Committee on Legislation in California, FCLCA, has like a quick action you can take with it. But I think that this is a disturbing trend, and I wondered what you have to say about that.
I just heard about that a couple of weeks ago, and one person you might follow on the federal level is Edward Housebrook, Hasbrouck. He covers what goes on in the National Defense Appropriations Act, which we have to approve every single year. And every single year they insert into that bill drafting women, forcing women to register for the draft. And when they finally decide on the bill, they go into secret meetings, and so far they've always pulled that thing out of there where women have to register. So far they've always done that. The reason? I don't think women are going to put up with it. But Housebrook puts out these really elaborate articles that explain the NDAA, which is a federal thing. And I need to go back and look at the one you're talking about, because I only heard about it about 2 weeks ago or less.
Donna, will you put either in the chat now, or if you have an email that you got for this program from Rick Banales, is it it's a Senate or Assembly bill?
SB 1081. Senate bill.
Right. And if you have a link to
I tried. I'll keep trying.
And what the Friends Committee is doing on this, I think we should try to follow up on that.
Thank you.
On our board, our legislative advocate is Rebecca Arvizu. She's got her hands full with all kinds of stuff, but I really think if we have time, ICUJP should oppose SB 1081. I just want to say that it's obvious in listening to Bob that these programs are never one-off. We haven't finished with Bob's life and work. He made that clear at the end of his remarks. The comments of many of you. This is the struggle. This is exactly the struggle, and we learn from each other and we gain strength from each other. And Bob was gracious enough to recognize that different people have different pathways. I am so in awe of Bob, because I had points in my career and I did not muster the courage that he has exhibited. I made a non-religious application for conscientious objector status because I could not sign a paper that said that my resistance to the Vietnam War was based in a belief in a supreme being, which at the time was demanded by the government, dictating what one's conscientious objection is. They would dictate what it had to be. And I was rejected in that respect. Because of medical reasons. I got a 1Y exemption and went on to draft counseling and the rest of my work, which I won't extend today. But the point is, everybody can resist, each in their own way and each in their own setting. And I want to, we'll be building on that theme this year at ICUJP. A quick one, Phil, because we're done now. You're passing? Yes. I wanted to do this earlier. Anthony, yes. Anthony, could you collect your thoughts and bring us full circle from your reflection at the beginning to sending us off at the end?
We are doing announcements.
We are now doing announcements. You took the words out of my mouth. Go right ahead.
Okay, I put in the chat, if you go to the chat, the top two things that you'll see, both from me, and one is a link to my solo show, and the other is to the Handala that we heard about when we had the four of us speaking. You really want to have everybody go if she has tickets left. My favorite film show, the whole thing, was Handala, and there were other ones that were really good too. But I really want people to see that because it's on Palestine, and this woman, Miriam, becomes all these different women and men, and it's really powerful. And also, I really want people to see mine because I only sold a few tickets so far, and I don't want to empty theater to do my last show in. So really, if you write in the when you're buying the tickets, the last thing you'll see is put in, do you have a discount code? And if you write in Robeson, you'll get a free ticket. So you can invite all your friends that you want to have come to my show and maybe help you convince them of what you've been trying to convince them. And also, of course, there's Jennifer's and Crystal's show that are really good. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is exactly, we resist in every way we can. Bob.
A couple things. I'm looking to show The Boys Who Said No or the Harry Pregerson film. If you know of colleges or law schools that want that show, and then I do Q&A with Dean Pregerson and Terry Sanders. So I'm looking for places to do that to get the message out, and also Our Town is tomorrow afternoon at Crow Comedy at 2:30 in Santa Monica. Dave Clinton. Where'd she go? Mimi Kennedy and
Right.
Keith David and a bunch of actors. Thanks.
And that's in the chat as well, everyone.
I'm still
Yes.
here. I'm still here.
I see Mimi. I think we need a film festival. We need a Bob Zaugh film festival. Really, The Boys Who Said No, the Pregerson film, Cast the First Stone. These are, important films. So we're going to work on that.
Is there a link to the Pregerson film or how to see it?
It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, it's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Oh, great. What's it called?
It's called Ninth Circuit Cowboy, The Long Good Fight of Judge Harry Pregerson. But just do Ninth Circuit Cowboy. I'm sure you'll get guided.
Wow. That sounds awesome. Thank you.
We'll do a follow-up as part of releasing this recording, Rick, and list these films and any opportunities people have to see them. Rick, did you raise your hand a moment ago?
Actually, Bob covered it, so that's great.
Good.
Oh, just one thing, the link tree is in there. So there's a whole bunch of information on projects that people have done that they've talked about at ICUJP. Also, a couple links if you'd like to help support. We're doing more stuff out and about live, and there are costs incurred in that. So you can either go and make a monthly donation. There's also a link if you want to use PayPal or Google Wallet, Apple Wallet. You can do that too.
And I want to make the earliest announcement that on July 28th, from 3 to 5 at All Saints Church, ICUJP is presenting Life, Not Death, Celebrating Palestinian Culture in Time of War. So we have succeeded in obtaining All Saints Church in Pasadena from 3 to 5 on Sunday, July 28th. Put it in your calendars. Of course, you'll see announcements. It's going to be a major cultural event to lift up life, not death, celebrating Palestinian culture in time of war. We looked in our hearts and decided, what can ICUJP do distinctively in this period? I thank everybody. We now begin to close our program today. Bob Zaugh is already a card-carrying member of ICUJP, and his VIP card got stamped today. Thank you, Bob, so much. I myself am going to go back and watch this program because I want to even more deeply reflect on what you had to tell us. Thank you. Let's turn to a close with Anthony.
Spirit of justice and peace and love, we're so grateful to be together, to be guided by you, and also for Bob reminding us of the power of prayer and the power of showing up and standing up for what we believe. We're given hope by this man's message and his life. We're given hope by the example of Julian Assange, and we just are grateful that together we can do our bit to help bring peace and justice to this world. So let's go in peace with hope and with confidence that if we're faithful, all will be well.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Please rejoin us next week at 7:30. We will be here. We want you here. Be safe and go well.